Hi, it's Sandra Brown with the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction and Public Pathology Education. This is the second in a series that I'm doing on what I meant about narcissistic abuse when I wrote the first book about it. There was another video I did on the introduction that explained why I'm doing this series to correct a lot of stuff I never said and never meant about this field. So some of you may recognize this, which was the book that launched what has become the narcissistic and psychopathic abuse field. The first cover did not look like this. This is the third edition, but the title has been the same. Women Who Love Psychopaths Inside the Relationships of Inevitable Harm with Psychopaths, Sociopaths, and Narcissists. So I'm weighing in because, you know, honestly, I don't even recognize my work out there or the theory or any of the stuff that we studied and put in the first, second, and third, copies of editions of this book. And I think we've gotten really off track, really far away from what we actually know. So I think I'm going to start giving a little history to this new, what appears to be a new emerging genre of counseling. So for me, it is not a new genre. I have worked in this field for 30 years, which is why I had enough information and knowledge to write the book about it. I began my career 30-some years ago running a personality disorder clinic. And we attempted to treat personality disordered people, and spent 12 or 14 years in that clinic. And of course, personality disordered people's relationships suck. So they were bringing their partners in, as an attempt at the relationship issues. So it wasn't very long into the personality disorder clinic where we began seeing the surviving partners of these cluster B disorders. And by that, I mean borderline narcissistic, antisocial personality disorders, and also the disorder of psychopathy. So it wasn't very long into, as we were, working with people with personality disorders, that they were wanting to bring their partners in. And of course, doing couples counseling with someone with a personality disorder or psychopathy is, number one, not advised, and number two, never successful. So we created a whole separate program for survivors, for the partners, and worked with them separately. Did a lot of psychoeducation with them so that they understood personality disorders. So they would stop sitting around waiting for change, and understand the limitations of expecting change. And we had groups for them, and eventually a trauma program for them, because so many of them were coming out of these relationships with some level of either trauma symptoms, or eventually it became a full-blown trauma disorder, like acute stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress. And so eventually, you know, we had sort of this dual program of the personality disordered people and then their partners and even children. So over a period of time, I had flown all over the United States, getting the latest, greatest, best, whatever that was, training in personality disorders. And in fact, I spent more on my personality disorder specialization training than I did on my whole graduate degree. And so that's how serious, you know, I was about the desire at that time, before I knew better, of wanting to do this work in personality disorders. And so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't too long into, you know, the personality disorder clinic when I started getting probably what everybody else, you know, ends up learning is about the low treatment outcomes in personality disorders. And so once the partners and survivors, you know, started to become part of our counseling program, it was after the first decade that I completely switched over into treating the partners and survivors. And we eventually phased out of personality disorder treatment and just began the trauma treatment, if you will, of the survivor partners. And so it has been over the course of my whole career. I haven't worked in anything else. That I was able to, you know, collect, begin keeping and information, testing their trauma, mapping out the unusual relationship dynamics, really working on the survivor partner personality and why they were being targeted. And so what has come out of this in this book was not this quick theory about oh, I think this, and I'm going to write a 422-page book about that. It came out of an entire career in researching and digging deeply and working with hundreds of survivors, you know, over 3 decades. And so this was not a quick theory that just bloomed out of nowhere. I know it looks like that because all of a sudden that word is everywhere. And but that's not how it was generated. It was generated methodically over a lot of years. In fact, hold on. I introduced a little bit of the conversation about personality disordered relationships in this book, How to Spot a Dangerous Man. This one came out before the Psychopath book. One of the 8 dangerous man types is the emotional predator. And he introduced the concept of pathological love relationships, which are a relationship with at least one partner who has permanent pathology. And so in this book, you know, we talked about it in terms of narcissists and psychopaths. And the reaction to this book, and especially to that dangerous man type, the emotional predator, was so huge. You know, people were asking more and more about about the dynamics of that. And we're, you know, writing in their stories, which match the stories of our clients over many, many years. And so all of that rolled over into, this is not the first edition, this is the third edition. I don't think I have one here to show you that cover and then the second edition cover. But anyway, all that information rolled over into, you know, these books. So as contrary to what it looks like out there, that this just bloomed out of nowhere, that's really not true. So I am 30 some years into this, but the awareness of the field per se, let's see, it's 2020 this year. This book came out in 2005, and then the first edition of this book came out in 2008. And so the full explanation of the relationship dynamics, of the aftermath, and the beginnings of the conversation about what in the survivor is being targeted is as old out there in internet world as 2008. So, you know, so we're more than a decade into this. So it didn't, you know, just bloom recently. And for me, it bloomed many decades ago. But the awareness part of it launched with this book, the first edition of this book, and followed by the second edition of the book a year later, because I was still pulling together all of our information about survivors' symptoms and personalities and why they were targeted, and the research that we had done on the #1 symptom of people coming out of these pathological relationships with borderlines, narcissists, antisocials, and psychopaths was the issue of cognitive dissonance, which I talked about in the first book. And then we have spent a decade researching in depth the impact of cognitive dissonance on the survivor. So I know that it looks like the whole field has just sort of recently blown up, because all of a sudden there appears to be no dating partners that are just jerks or just your run-of-the-mill situational abusers. We don't have those anymore. Everyone is a narcissist. If they have said anything that hurt your feelings, they are a narcissist. Everybody's parent is a narcissist. Everybody's next door neighbor, every, and we have completely lost the ability to differentiate. And the reason I wrote these books was to differentiate these from dysfunctional or bad or even some levels of abusive relationships, because they deserve to be differentiated, because what makes them different is the dangerousness of the pathology of their partner, because what is dangerous is when you can't fix something. So there are abusers that are not pathological, and they go into anger management or batter intervention, and they don't batter again. Then there are the batterers that are personality disordered, and they go through the same exact program, and they're the ones that are prone to be recidivistic, that they abuse again and again and again. And so the whole focus, on the Dangerous Man book, that's what I'm talking about in terms of dangerousness, is that it's not just about violence, it's about the inability to be treated. Because if you're violent and you can be treated and have good outcomes, you're rehabilitated. But when you're dangerous and you have what's called psychopathology or abnormal psychology, which are the types of disorders in the DSM that have really low or no treatment outcomes, that's what's dangerous to the victim partner when she thinks or he thinks that you are of the other type that can be treated, which is why you guys probably have drugged them to all sorts, of types of therapies. But we've lost that because everybody has overused this word. And, the sad part is the number one thing that survivors said they needed, we did this Finding Competent Care survey of hundreds of survivors, and the number one problem they had was finding a therapist that understood this. And so the Institute has been in this developing a therapist training program because of what we found in that survivor survey that says there's not enough knowledgeable people out there. So we have been, we're ready to launch this year. So what has happened in the meantime is that so many survivors that have become narcissism experts, I don't know how you do that when this is all about the specialization of psychopathology, but okay. That everything is narcissistic abuse. And we're having a really hard time getting legitimate therapists to take this seriously. There are I think the last time we looked, there was 800 blogs, books, social media, My Life with a Narcissist kinds of accounts. And so, the trauma therapists who were trying to get interested in this see this everybody's a narcissist thing, and they don't take this seriously. And considering that the survivor said this is the number one problem they have, is we need to get more therapists trained. We are running them off by utilizing the wrong concepts, labeling everything narcissism, and attributing the most god-awful stuff to what supposedly is theory that I never said, I never taught, I never meant. So if you want to know the real deal, either go to our website, saferelationshipsmagazine.com, or the book, or keep checking back, because I'm going to keep doing these videos until hopefully we can turn this around. And one of the big problems is that the information that survivors get, even about the nature of personality disorders, is important because they're going to use that information in order to utilize in recovery. And so when it's wrong, when these bloggers and survivors are writing this ridiculous stuff about personality disorders that isn't correct, a survivor is relying on that information to be correct. I mean, they're making life-changing decisions based on stuff survivors are writing, like leaving a relationship, divorcing, taking their children, you know, and leaving this relationship. And so it does matter if the information is correct. And I just shudder when I look at what has happened to real information, the core of the information out there. So I'm gonna keep banging away at this, hopefully to correct. So please share this so that people will be coming back to find out what I meant. So this has been interview number 1, full interview number 1, and there was an intro, you know, prior to this. So if you want to look back. So anyway, thank you for joining me. I'm Sandra Brown with the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction. Thank you.